Hi, welcome to Jeremy Pryor's podcast, or what I like to call Jeremy Pryor Unfiltered. I'm his daughter and producer, Kelsey Gall, and we are excited to bring you seasons of content all the way from Tolkien to theology, from business to family. If you like to contemplate deep philosophical ideas across a wide range of topics, you've come to the right place. Make sure you give us a follow so you don't miss out on future episodes.
I know I promised you guys we're going to talk about head coverings. I know you guys are really excited to do this. So I'll read to you the past. So we have a family WhatsApp group, and I threw this bomb out there, which was a tweet that basically, I'll read it to you guys real quick, and then I'll read the passage here. So there's this tweet that went out that I was fascinated by. It says, "Here's a little historical fact. Make of it what you will. In every single denomination of Christianity on every continent, Roman Catholic, Eastern Orthodox, Coptic, Lutheran, Continental Reformed, Anabaptist, Anglican, Presbyterian, Puritan congregation goes on and on, Separatist, General Baptist, blah, blah, blah. Women wore head coverings until the 1900s. Now, I was a part of I grew up actually in a tradition where women wore head coverings in the 1970s and 80s. And then we left eventually, that group, when I was in 8th grade. And so this is a really interesting topic. I think it's really important to actually talk about more than we do, because I think it kind of gets to, it helps you understand like how to interpret parts of the Bible. It helps you like kind of work out family issues, gender issues. All these things are kind of intertwined in this topic. It's not easy to interpret this, right? So Paul says in 1 Corinthians 11, "Be imitators of me as I am of Christ. Now I commend you because you remember me in everything and maintain the traditions, even as I delivered them to you." I think every part of this is really important to look at. So he's using this word traditions. He's like, maintain the traditions. This is kind of the context. He's kind of rebuking the people for violating some traditions. But I want you to understand that the head of every man is Christ, the head of a wife is her husband, and the head of Christ is God. Every man who prays or prophesied with his head covered dishonors his head, but every wife who prays and prophesies with her head uncovered dishonors her head, since it is the same as if her head were shaven. Or if a wife will not cover her head, then she should cut her hair short. But since it is disgraceful for a wife to cut her hair or shave her head, let her cover her head. For a man ought not to cover his head, since he is the image and glory of God, but woman is the glory of man. For man was not made from woman, but woman from man. Neither was man created for woman, but woman for man. That is why a wife ought to have a symbol. This is like a really loaded phrase, symbol of authority on her head. And then he says, comma, because of the angels. What? Okay. Nevertheless, in the Lord, woman is not independent of man, nor man of woman. For as woman was made from man, so man is now born of a woman. Okay, so there's an interdependent relationship between both sides, and all things are from God. Judge for yourself. And this is the part that really got me confused. Judge for yourselves, right? Is it proper for a wife to pray to God with her head uncovered? Say you. Does not nature itself teach you that if a man wears long hair, it is disgraceful for him? But if a woman has long hair, it is her glory. For her hair is given to her as a covering. If anyone is inclined to be contentious, we have no such practice, nor do the churches of God. And it seems like he's just saying there, no such practice where women are no longer covering their head. Now we do have such practice. So there's a lot of elements of this that I find really, really difficult to interpret. And so people debate, but the vast majority, of course, of Christianity has, and this is recent. I think the thing that really got me about the tweet was, if you use the argument that this is not done anymore, that argument could not have really won the day 100 years ago, because the majority of churches did see women having their head covered. And the last thing I want to say to you guys is, the reason why I really want to have this conversation is that it seems like it could be an example of what's called the Chesterton's fence. Are you guys familiar with that analogy? Let me describe to you. So G.K. Chesterton basically said that the difference between a conservative and a liberal is that if you're walking in the woods and you see a fence, a conservative says, I don't know why this fence is here. And so because I don't know, I'm going to leave it. And a liberal is somebody who says, I don't know why this fence is here, so let's get rid of it. It's a really perfect analogy because basically, people have those two reactions to seeing a boundary. One is an assumption that I don't know the reason for it. If I don't know the reason for it, we should leave it alone because maybe there's a good reason for it. Another reaction is if I don't know the reason for it, we should get rid of it because obviously there is no reason. And Chesterton's like, well, you don't know the reason. You don't know why the fence is there. And if you destroy it, you might suddenly discover that there was actually a really good reason for that fence to be there. And here come, you know, the reasons you're going to start to suffer. And so my question is head covering a chest a Chestertonian fence? We didn't know why it was there. We couldn't make an articulation for it. And so we got rid of it. And all of a sudden, we're starting to, 100 years later, experience the ramifications of why that was there. Is that possible? That's my question that I started wrestling with. Go ahead, Kels.
Isn't there a quote that you have said that about traditions where it's like traditions are solutions to problems that we've forgotten or something like
Yes.
that?
Yeah, that's
Like,
another
that's
quote.
what that makes me think of. As soon as you said the word tradition in that verse, I hadn't picked up on that before. That's immediately what I thought.
Yes.
Like, and the fact that this is
Traditions are solutions to problems that we forgot, like that we no longer, because they solved the problem that we don't have the problem anymore. It's very similar to the Chestertonian fence. Yes.
well, that itself is like interesting to me because the fact that he uses the word tradition,
Yeah.
um, kind of rings that bell in my head. And then I also just as a wife put myself in a position of like, what if I'm like in an argument with my husband as we like arrive to church or something and I'm like really frustrated and I'm just like, you're making all the wrong choices or whatever. And I have to walk in and put a head covering on. Like I-
Right.
that feels jarring to me. That feels like I am instantly put in my place. And I don't think that anyone would necessarily like that feeling,
Right.
but I think that that reminder is potentially crucial, and we don't have that at all anymore, and so you can just be angry about something you have to submit about and just either continue to be angry or continue to fight for your way or whatever the situation is without having the reminder of like, "Okay, even though we're in the middle of a argument, I am the submissive one."
Right. That,
And
that, that
that's so offensive to so many people nowadays.
yeah, that's a really good example of, um, yeah, I think that's what I kind of picture is that if your lifestyle is constantly out of sync with what you experience during your 2 hours you're in worship with your head covered, that might recover that identity that I'm in a family, that my family has a leader, that I'm not the leader. And so to wear a symbol of authority, for 2 hours a week, could create a kind of culture that would arrest the kind of um, confusion that is erupting between genders, or within families. I don't know if that's true. I think that's a really interesting point you're making, and I wondered that. What other arguments? So Kelsey, you brought up the word tradition. By the way, I think one of the ways to sort of take a lot of the intensity out of the discussion about head coverings is to put it in a third category, which I believe it actually does exist in, and that is it's not a moral category. Now, I think this upsets both sides, I think, of the debate, but I sort of put it here, which is I think that there are traditions that are important, but they're not necessarily moral. Like I don't believe that even in the most literal reading of this passage, a woman who walks into a church with her head uncovered and prays and prophesied with her head uncovered, I don't know that I would consider that like a sinful act. Now I think there could be a sinful spirit behind that act, but I don't know that that's a to me it's the question that I think is much more helpful is to say, is this a useful tradition? You know, it's no longer a tradition in any groups that I'm a part of, and it was removed as a tradition. And you guys can maybe you disagree and think, well, because he talks about nature or the angels, maybe there this is a moral decision. But to me, it feels like a tradition that honors the list of reasons that he gives, and that means that it isn't primarily a question of whether or not you should morally do this, but that there could be real power to this tradition if it were reestablished, some things that he's referring to that I think are really important. There's other things that are also important that I think this tradition violates in our culture. Could you imagine how difficult it is to do evangelism in a church where women are wearing head coverings? Um, I mean that's rough. If your model of church is primarily is the primary avenue for your outreach to the culture, and then all of a sudden the leaders in the church and all the women start to wear head coverings, that's going to be pretty hard on that model. Good luck with that. So you could say, well, that tradition is just not valid culturally anymore. It's just too costly. And I think that that argument needs to be faced very squarely, because that's a difficult argument, to overcome. But I think this is part of the reason why the conversation to me is so interesting. Well, what other elements of this does this sort of stir up for you guys? Other thoughts you guys have?
The Family Plan Calendar is the new way to keep your family team organized. Plan your rhythms, menu, household chores, and notes for the family all in one place. Visit familyteams.com to purchase.
Do you think that head coverings are also a symbol of like how a father of the home or like the husband is the one responsible for all the decisions made by his family to God? And so like a head covering could be like that physical symbol of like almost like protection over the woman, and then like the man is uncovered, the man is the one responsible.
Right.
Do you think that it's like
I,
this?
yeah, I do think it's a symbolic depiction of that. I think that the man is uniquely accountable to God for the actions of his household. And so what's happening in the case where a husband is uncovered before God, in the context where what we're doing is symbolically experiencing and entering into the throne room, so to speak, as a collective community. Okay, now we're going to the throne room. Certain people here are accountable for their households in ways that others are not. And so, whereas a wife is definitely accountable to God for herself, the husband is uniquely accountable to God for the entire household. And so, part of the reason why I think it's a useful symbol potentially is that it does cause husbands or fathers to wake up to that fact. I think that's what you're describing, Lisa, right? Like, man, what a useful thing for a husband to realize that, oh my gosh, I I bear the weight of responsibility for this household before God. I'm uncovered before God, and I need to take that responsibility more seriously than maybe I am. What
And
other
I think,
elements? Go ahead, Sid.
yeah, I think the part where he says for the or because of the angels, um, is similar to that because it says I think that verse says the woman should wear a symbol of authority because of the angels. And I think through thinking through that, me and Jackson had a talk about this a couple nights ago. But I think why it's saying that is because when you think about what the role of angels are in this context is to be the messengers of the prayers to God. And it's very helpful for them to acknowledge the chain of command, that if a woman is wearing a head covering, then they can very easily see this prayer is coming from this woman on behalf of the husband. And like there's a chain of command that is recognized, which is very helpful for them, for the messenger. And so it's while it's a symbol and it doesn't always have to be physical and it's not like a rule, like you're saying, like it's not a moral thing. Like if you do this without your head covered, then it's like really bad. It's more of a symbol of you coming under, like spiritually, coming under your husband to convey this message to God. So I think that that is the most important part of it, is that you are always going to be doing this on behalf of your husband and the leader and the leader of the household, or whoever else is the leader, like the father. Um, so yeah, I think that is a very helpful thing spiritually. Like I don't think everything that he's saying there is literal, especially with the hair. Like we're getting into like religious territories here where there's a lot of sects of Christianity that don't believe that women should ever cut their hair short. Like, um, so I don't think that everything is literal. You can take it literally, and then we'd get a lot more religious about it. I think it's more important for physical reminders, traditions, like you're saying, for these women, especially in a circumstance like Kelsey was saying, if you're having trouble submitting, putting a physical reminder on your head that you are still the submissive one, I can imagine would be very helpful spiritually.
I know you want to talk about that. I'm curious what your thoughts are. Go, Jackson.
Yeah, well, I think so in framing it, the question that you were asking, which is it a Chesterton fence? I think it is, just because I don't think we'd be having this conversation if it wasn't a Chesterton fence, because we've obviously forgotten exactly why this is the case, why he said that. There's debate over why he said that. Is it a command? Is it a tradition? Is it and if it is a tradition, then why is it important? So we've kind of bumped into this fence. And I think that I think that in the Christian world, I think it is important to have a third category. So I don't think it's just, let's just ignore it and leave it there. And let's just remove it. I think that it's important maybe every once in a while for somebody to bump into the fence and to rediscover the reason why it is there, because otherwise you could fall into religiosity without purpose. And the point of Christianity is for God to have our hearts, not our obedience, just necessarily like as if we're like not using our free will to love and obey him. He wants our hearts more. So there's a element to that I think we have to be, in it. We have to be we really have to be invested in it, hearts wise. But I would say, I think an element that he might be referring to, this could be actually a much older thing than we realize as to why this is important for a woman to feel this level of coverage. I think that there is a element that I think, broadly speaking, that is both spiritual and physical, which I think is why he refers to the symbolism to the eyes of the humans looking at the woman covering her head, and something about the spiritual side of angels looking at the woman covering her head. I think it's like there's two reasons for it. I think that, or there's two, it's affecting both worlds. I think that one thing that I thought of, I remember I had a thought a long time ago when I was reading in Genesis, the passage about the Nephilim, where it says the sons of God saw that the women were attractive, human women were attractive, and desired to mate with them, and they did, and they had children. And then you look in then you go in the old text, and you're like, that's weird that this is in Christian religion. It's also in every ancient religion. So Greek mythology, Roman mythology, it's everywhere. And it's this idea basically that women are way more vulnerable than we even think that they are. It's not even just physical people, it's the gods, or it's the spirits that could come and find them attractive as well. And you just see these horrible, horrible stories of Zeus or Hades or anybody just like finding a human woman attractive, and then using their incredible power to keep them, no matter how they feel or what they want or anything like that. And there's almost nothing to prevent that from happening. There's no barrier between that world seeing this or another man, because we all understand the idea of a man wanting to take advantage of a woman on earth, but it almost seems to be a spiritual element. So I remember when I read that, I was like, dang, women aren't safe, are so vulnerable. They're not even safe. Apparently they're even capturing the attention of the people from the other world. And so it's like, I wonder if there is an element to this, that this symbolizes it to all parties. Because I think that, for example, with a marriage, a lot of people say it's just a piece of paper, but I think there's a spiritual element to it just as much as it's a symbol to everybody at your wedding day that's physically there, that you are being joined before God and that he recognizes this union. There is also an element, I think, that's reflected spiritually where that's happening in the same way. This is mine, she is mine, and I'm now protecting her. And not only that, we are one, so it's like, we are now one, she is now mine. And I think that there is I think that this could be a really, really old tradition to try to symbolize to both sides of the coin, that there is a possessiveness and a protectiveness that I am supposed to have. I'm supposed to use, as a strength that I guess these two parties respect, humans and angels, when I'm trying to protect my wife from what could be.
Need a blueprint to revise your family to be a multi-generational team on mission? The book, Family Revision by Jeremy Pryor, is the book that summarizes all the big picture ideas you hear on this podcast, available on Amazon or familyteams.com.
So it sounds like, it's a really interesting point. I mean, because it is interesting that in the same verse, he says a symbol of authority on her head because of the angels. But what you're connecting there, Jackson, is the way that the spiritual world works is primarily through authority. And we oftentimes, I think, misunderstand. We think it's about power, but it's really about authority. You see that all through the Gospels, that basically, when Jesus would cast out a demon, they'd say, oh my goodness, he's got authority, authority, authority. And so the sense is that a spiritual being is attempting to discern whether or not they have authority to do what they want to do with this person, in terms of tormenting them or tempting them or whatever they might want to create some kind of foothold that the enemy wants to get in somebody's life. Do I have authority to do this? And so what you're saying,
Yeah.
Jackson, is that, okay, so you have evil spiritual beings that really want to gain authority. And that, with regards to angelic beings or, you know, that if she's willing to put a head covering on and say, look, I am under authority, then that kind of answers the question for the spiritual beings that are interacting in this church context. Oh, this woman has said, like this actually then creates almost a spiritual barrier between this wife and the spiritual being, that that the being must respect, and that we
Right.
sort of
Oh,
lost
yeah.
contact with that tradition.
Yeah, that's but if you think about it, it's not a stretch because it's like that was the first sin. I mean, Satan went right for Eve
Mm.
and he just talked to her, and Adam was literally sitting there listening to everything. Like if I was at a bar and some dude, walked up to my wife to try to talk to her and was trying to convince her of an idea to disobey God, like, what's my job? Is like there needs to be an obvious symbol um, that she is covered. Like how does he know that she's protected? So today there's like a wedding ring on her finger. And even if he just disobeyed and disregarded all of that and came up and talked to her, even if he talked to her with good intentions, I would make sure that he is totally aware of my presence in the conversation, there with her in his face. Like, you go through me and then you can talk to her. If I let you do that, if I even let you get that close. But yeah, it's like the spirits are complete. I mean, if you even see when this tradition started getting off track, I mean, these two topics we're talking about are really connected. Like there like women are considered a hugely oppressed minority among the liberal agenda. Like feminism is a huge part of that. It's a whole sect. There's like Black Lives Matter, LGBTQ, and then there's feminism. Feminism is a huge part of it. And they're the ones in the 1900s that were probably pushing for this tradition to be completely removed, which was probably means on a spiritual level, there were tons of spirits that were trying to get the authority back, like trying to get the authority back into the women to be able to talk to them again, to be able to convince them to come out from the protection of under their husbands. And ever since that same era of the 1900s, we've seen an explosion of feminism that has become to that Benjamin guy's point, it's become something that has an insatiable hunger for more equality. And now it's like we're now at the point where bringing up this head covering topic is completely offensive. And now to even think that you should protect your woman as a symbol to the angels and as a symbol to the humans that she is protected is ridiculous. And then you look at the women where they're not protected and they're violated and taken advantage of by humans and by spirits all the time, like constantly.
Very interesting. One of the things that there was a little debate on Twitter last week that one of my friends posted. He was probably talking about it in a church context, but he's like, I don't debate with another man's wife. I think it's a bad look, like a bad tradition almost, like he was saying. I'll talk to the man, and man, he's got a lot of followers. So there was just this torrent of feminists who thought this was absolutely appalling, to suggest that, I mean, there's some kind of barrier between, a wife and any man that she wants to argue with, and this disadvantages women. And to your point, Jackson, it's like, it is really interesting. to think about this as a Chestertonian fence that we've broken down and then left women incredibly vulnerable and in both the human and spiritual sense, and that we wouldn't know until you. And so the in order to sort of pressure test your hypothesis, what you would want to see is say, okay, well, let's imagine we remove the fence. Let's take the head coverings off. Do we see some example of wives becoming uniquely vulnerable to spiritual attacks and spiritual deceptions? I'm not seeing that. Have you guys seen that? Of course, I'm joking. It's like,
Yeah, right,
I can't
exactly.
imagine a more perfect description of what's occurred. So
Yeah. It's exact. They're paralleled completely. They're like, as soon as the husbands stop caring about the spirits they could be vulnerable to and the people they could be vulnerable to, they were, it might have been the man's fault. Like, it was the same problem with Adam. Like, it was his fault for not protecting, and men were not being very protective. They were being very selfish during that period of time.
Yeah.
Like, it was during Prohibition, so they're like coming home and beating their wives. They're coming like they're very self indulgent, but they're like supposed to be protective. And and it's like, if they lost faith in men to protect them, then yeah, take the head coverings off and see what happens. And what's happened is men got more passive, women got more aggressive, and the spirits are completely in control of feminism now, and they're all dark and try to destroy the family and everything.
Well, I do like what you said, Jackson, about the wedding ring, because that was another thing I was gonna say. Is like, seems like it's a version of a wedding ring. If you were looking down on a group of people praying, you could easily identify who is covered or who is like under authority. Just like if you were at a bar, you wouldn't, like, if you're a moral person, would not hit on someone with a wedding ring. Like, you're looking like who's single, and that's what you're looking for. You're looking for someone without a ring, you know? So it feels like that same thing.
all right, so you guys ready to put on your spiritual shields?
Well, it says wives, which I think is interesting because it's not like daughters too. So
Right.
it uses the word wives. So I thought that was interesting because mom was just saying that she was reading in Numbers this week something that was like, okay, if a daughter has her dad and she makes this vow, and then if she has a husband and makes this vow, like making the difference between like if your dad versus your husband is an authority over you. But this one doesn't have that. It just says wives.
Yeah.
So I think that's interesting. It's not daughters. They're not included in that.
Right. Yeah.
On that note, it's just like, a little girl is her own covering. Like, there is a innocence about a little girl, a beauty about a little girl that is to be protected. There is no, like, a predator should be super easy to detect approaching a little girl. Like, there's a sense about that already should be upheld. It's just when that little girl grows up and she's 18 now, she's more sexually appealing. Suddenly people start getting selfish about that, and they have to, and it's like, it's up to somebody. It's kind of like the Ruth and Boaz story. It's like Ruth is in a place where she could easily be raped or hurt or something like that. In Bethlehem is a slum. And, it's like, unless a noble man comes and tries to take them under his ward, to protect them. And then immediately, as soon as he does it, he's covered. Like, she's covered in the field when she's working. He sends all his male servants to protect her. He said, he said, like, don't leave my young men. Don't leave them. They won't touch you. And they will protect you from anyone trying to touch you. It's like he's covering. And until that happens, there's like a period after, like, sweet little girl daughtership and into the realm of teenage adult girl, beauty that is like suddenly, up for grabs.
Very interesting. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much, family, for exercising free speech with me. Publicly talk about completely off limits topics. But I definitely think we need to have the courage to wade into these hard conversations and be willing to model talking about these things publicly. So that's what we're trying to do as a family. Cool. Well, we can continue this discussion at the Shabbat table, because it is Shabbat and we're going to hang out tonight. So I'm looking forward to hanging with you guys. You guys have a good rest of your day. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for listening to Jeremy Pryor's podcast. Make sure you hit that follow button so you don't miss out on any future content. Follow Jeremy on Twitter and Instagram, as well as his Substack blog, all linked in the description. See you next time.